Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to CPA Academy. My name is Christopher, and I am so happy to welcome you into today's webinar on Diversity and Inclusion One-on-One, the Pan-Asian Experience. Our presenters today are Jina Etienne and Jeff Chin, and before we get started, I want to go through some housekeeping items and do some technical checks to make sure everything is working for you. So first, if you don't mind, find the GoToWebinar control panel. This is located on the right-hand side of your screen. Find that drop-down labeled questions. If you can't, pop that open. We're going to have several uses for this one panel today, but right now, if you could drop me a note, let me know that you can hear the sound of my voice. You can see the slides up on the screen. And as always, let us know where you're listening in from. All right, I'm seeing your responses pour in right now. Hello, hello, and welcome. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to have an amazing conversation with us here at cpaacademy.org. Now, if anyone's having any technical issues, you can let me know in this same panel right here, and I'll do my best to get around to each and every one of you as quickly as I can. And if you have any questions whatsoever for our presenters throughout today's course, you can put them right here. And we do have a lot to cover, so if we don't get to your question, don't worry, we will provide those questions to our presenters in a report after today's course wraps up. But now that we know things are working, let's talk about our credit. This is a 1-hour webinar and qualifies for 1 CPE credit. The way you earn that credit, as always, is straightforward. Just stay logged in for 50 minutes of our allotted time and answer the polls. Today, we'll have a total of 4 polls during our webinar. In order to earn full credit, you need to answer at least 3 of those polls. We'll leave each of our polls open for 60 seconds to give everyone time to respond. If you don't see the poll, it opens in its own window, so simply minimize your window if you're in full screen mode and try refreshing your browser. Your CPE will be issued by the end of the day today. It'll be available in your CPA Academy account, along with an archived recording of this presentation that you can watch at your leisure as well. Last but not least, take a moment to download our handouts. There's a PDF in the handout section at the very bottom of your control panel. You'll be able to follow along. And with that, we are all set, so I will take a step back and turn everything over. Jina and Jeff, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Just doing a sound check. Am I coming through?
Loud and clear.
Excellent. So everyone, good afternoon or morning, I guess, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us on another D&I one-on-one. I'm excited to be speaking with Jeff today. So Jeff Chin, I'll give you just a little bit of an introduction. Jeff is an inaugural founder of Ascend, and actually the inaugural president, currently serving on the board. I met Jeff several years ago. When I was at NAB, I was president and CEO, and I had the opportunity to meet Jeff and work with Jeff because those two organizations have an alliance together. And we also work together at the National Commission on Diversity and Inclusion for the AICPA. So I'm excited to have you here with us, Jeff, today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. And one of the things that I always do with our guests is I start off with the big question, which is, why is this conversation so important to you?
Well, first of all, Jina, thank you very much for inviting me to have this conversation. I'm very excited to be on this webinar, and it's a great time to have the webinar because it's Asian American Heritage Month. So let's all celebrate it, as well as, enjoy and support the Pan-Asian community. So thank you very much once again for having me join you. And the reason why I think this is apropos is also because of what's going on in the world today. There's been a lot of discussions and things going on as it relates to anti-Asian sentiment. And, one of the things that Ascend and I truly believe in is being the voice and making sure that we help and work to fight racism, and as well, which includes, the anti-Asian hate. So, what I like to do is just give you also a little bit of a background about myself, just to let you know a little bit about me.
Sure.
So I've been very, very fortunate in my career, and that I was always been very ambitious, fast-tracked, I graduated from a high school that's pretty well known in New York City by the name of Stuyvesant at the age of 16, and completed college before somewhere around when I was 20. I was fortunate to be hired by EY, and as Jina mentioned, I spent 30 years there, 20 of it as a partner. And that's where, I consider that to be one of my families, the EY family, because without the EY family, I would not be where I am today. They helped me to make sure that we understand the importance of giving back and to help everyone. I was fortunate enough to be on the inaugural task force for diversity and inclusion. And that's where, I could say that I had my aha moment in that when I looked at the statistics, and this is way, way, way back when, there weren't that many Asians getting promoted. I was one of the few partners, if not one of the first Pan-Asians to make it to partner in the mainstream audit. And so, with that in mind, seeing that we were hiring a lot more Asians, like when I first started, which was way, way back when, I was one of the first or only Asians in the New York office. And at that time, the New York office of Ernst & Ernst was only about 100 people. So there weren't that many Asians there. But by the time I made it to partnership, we had probably something close to 15% Pan-Asians, but they weren't rising through the ranks. So, being on the task force, I always felt that we had to do something. So I started the EY Employee Resource Group, and then knowing that we needed to connect with the rest of the community, after we started the Employee Resource Group, we started the predecessor to Ascend. And that's where we got a lot of the senior Pan-Asian partners around the city to get together. They were seeing the same thing that we were seeing at an EY. And so we formed Ascend to help give back, to help the next generation, and to give back to the community, which has been very good to us. So that's why I'm very excited to be talking about how we all can work together in these times as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'll stop there. And so that way we could have a discussion. Jina, or do you want to do the polling first and then have the discussion?
I think let's start with the poll, Christopher. So I don't know if you're on mute.
That is now launched and live on everyone's screen. We'll leave this open for 60 seconds.
Great, thank you. So while they're polling there, Jeff, thank you so much for sharing that with us, because I think having that background is so important. And you can speak from years of experience and looking at how the profession has transformed and how we've made progress. But also, particularly with your role at Ascend, we've got a lot more work to do. And so, once we finish this poll, we can jump into that conversation.
Absolutely. I think, as I said, this is a great time to have the discussion as it relates to diversity and inclusion.
Right.
And, thank you very much for saying it in a nice way that I am old on experience. So I can share that experience and telling you through my lens as to how I've seen things progress.
All right. So do we have the results up there, Christopher?
We do. Looks like 40% chose 13%, 20% chose 9%, 15% chose 24%, 12% chose 3%, and the remaining 13% said they weren't sure.
Hold on, I'm writing it down because I don't know that I'm following those answers. So 15% went with the first one. Is that how I read this?
Correct.
All right, so, dun, 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 and the right answer is 3%. No, sorry, it's C, 9%. And most people answered either 13% or 9%. And we actually know that it's 9%. So that's interesting. It doesn't exactly correlate with what you were talking about, Jeff. You were saying 15% in your, I'm guessing, office, your EY office in New York. Was it 15% representation?
No, it's nationwide. And so let me clarify the numbers that you're giving, because it depends on who's on the phone on the webinar. What I have seen going through and talking to a lot of the accounting firms, you see that the larger firms like the Big Four has a much higher percentage of Pan-Asians in its professional workforce. And so that the numbers doesn't surprise me. It's greater than 50%. Some of them are in certain offices over 20% in some of the practices. And if I read the poll correctly, that they do sometimes go above 20%. In the smaller firms, the numbers start to decrease, and that to me is where, working on the AICPA, we've seen that there needs to be a lot more push towards diversity and inclusion in the smaller firms. And we're not just talking about Pan-Asians, we're talking about all diversity, which a lot of them need to address and focus on.
Right. I was just looking at the trends report earlier for something else I was working on. And at the partner level in public accounting, the report is dated 2019. So we would hope there's been some progress. But the partner level is only 5% people of color.
Yes. Once again, because I've learned this being at the AICPA and at the NCDI, that the numbers, I would say, are a little bit skewed.
Yes.
Once again, it's heavily influenced because of the mix of what makes up the AICPA. Right. So if you take a look at the transparency reports that came out from, say, EY, KPMG, or the other big firms, a lot of them, and this is the thing that I feel good about, is that the big firms have made progress in being more diverse, not just in the Pan-Asians, but in all. But even though the Pan-Asians represent the biggest ethnic group, the numbers in terms of partnership has been rising ever since I've been there. Like I said, when I first became a partner, I was one of the few, if not the first. So anywhere from there is a great improvement.
Right.
And numbers have gone up pretty well. But having said that, I think all the big firms recognize there's still a lot more to do and a lot more to go. And so I would say for those on the phone, if you want, you could take a look at those transparency reports. I think they made them available. And I know EY has it. I saw KPMG's. I think I also saw PwC's. But you'll see that the numbers, and they do represent not just ethnic, but also be talking about diversity in total. Yeah. And you'll see that the numbers there are greater than, I believe, the 5%.
Yep. And actually, I used to work at Grant, and I know Grant issued a report as well. So I would certainly, thank you for that, encourage everyone to go out and look at those reports. And so you were talking about when you sort of snuck in there, when we're looking at the demographics of the people of color, that the Asian representation is higher. So can you talk to us a little bit about how does that align with this notion then? I've certainly heard this, that, well, the Pan-Asian community has sufficient representation that they don't really need the effort and the support of the broader D&I. But I think you and I both know that's not true, that voice is still important to be included in the D&I conversation. And there's some myths around that. Do you want to talk a little bit about those myths?
Oh, absolutely. So, I would probably say that's the reason why we started at SEN, and that's why I am a strong advocate and the voice in terms of talking about Pan-Asians. Just to give you a little background, we did start a SEN, as I told you, primarily because, there's a big preponderance of Pan-Asians that were in my firm as well as within the profession, but not a lot of them were getting promoted or moving up. As a matter of fact, they were leaving at a much faster rate than all other ethnicities. And I would say that, when we talk about the profession and speaking at it at the AICPA, the major focus, and this is something that we must address, is that there must be a major push to make the firms more diverse, and focusing primarily on getting more African Americans and Hispanics into the firms. Because there, if you do take a look at the numbers, they're pretty low in terms of representation. And so a lot of people use the terminology that the Asians are overrepresented in the profession. And, that, in a nice way, that really bothers me. Because to me, I think it's always going to be something that you have to focus on merit. A lot of this, I think, that Jina was talking about is what's known as the model minority myth, in that to me, it's a double-edged sword. And we actually put out a report about that it seems to have helped us, but also has hurt us. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I want to do is I want to try and make sure that there's a level playing field for all. And so, when I first started on this diversity and inclusion journey, I would say that the firms did start talking about African Americans, Hispanics, and then women. But there was very little discussion, as Jina indicated, about the Asians. Everyone always thought that, hey, we got a lot of Asians. There's nothing wrong. So, one of the things I always say is, well, what about the Asians? You're hiring them, but then they're not making it through the ranks. We've done quite a few studies, and the studies show that, the Pan-Asian women are the least likely to get promoted into executive ranks or into the partnerships.
Hey, Jeff, I want you to hold that thought real quick. Please don't forget it. I want all of our attendees to know that if you download the handout, there are some slides that include all of the resources that and the white papers that you're talking about, Jeff. I have on the screen the model minority one, but I just want to make sure I draw their attention to that. So please, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
And so what we did is we took a lot of the EEOC data and we analyzed it. And the second worst is going to be the African American women. So, in a sense, there's a double whammy against not just gender, but also against race. And so to me, that's a telling story that's what we need to address. As a matter of fact, all ethnic diverse candidates area, that needs to be addressed because, as Jina mentioned, there aren't that many people of color in the executive ranks. And that needs to be focused on, not just in the accounting profession, but also in corporate America. Right. So that's why we started Ascend. And the most important thing about it is that we're all in it together. Ascend was really started through what I refer to as our allies. There were African American, there was groups NABA and then Alpha, and they helped me to form Ascend. That's the true spirit of allyship. Mm-hmm. The people who we went to help convince them of the importance of having the third leg of the ethnic diversity stool were CDOs that were African American, and they wholeheartedly endorsed and supported, and they were the co-founders of Ascend. So to me, it is very important that we all are in it together, that there is allyship. Now, it's not just in the accounting profession, but even in what we're doing now as it relates to racism. It is very important that we all work together because all of us have experienced various degrees of racism. And so, when in 2020, when start of COVID, the one thing that we did was we put together a statement that was allies coming together, our act. And in that, we had all of our ally partners with NABA, Alpha, Catalyst, LBGT, and a whole bunch of other organizations of diverse, showing diversity, along with over 100 and something companies joined together to denounce racism and to agree to our 5-point agenda, which Jina will put up on later on. But to me, I think the message is that we all need to work together. Allyship is very, very important. And by working together, we get further together. And, one of my classic examples is that Ascend would not be where it is today without the help of our allies.
So just
put on the 5-point agenda. This was the main focus of our ACT statement. And, we wanted to make sure that the top of the chain is that we have to promote inclusion, as well as to raise awareness, to denounce bias, and also to help the communities, and also to, support through funding, since we are a not-for-profit organization, as well as all the other organizations. And like I said, over 110, I think the number has gone up significantly because other companies and organizations still continue to sign on to this agenda.
So I'm looking for my notes here because we talked a lot about a lot of things heading into this.
Yes.
You said that there hasn't been a lot of progression in the profession for Asian Americans in particular. Is it because so we know from the trends report that we're seeing a lot more diversity in the staff level. So in terms of moving up the ranks, are there specific things that are barriers, or are there specific things that, for those especially listening, that people can do to try to work past those barriers?
Okay, yes. And so that, once again, that's the reason why we started Ascend, because I can't tell you how many times people have come to me and to a lot of our executives, and even the executives have said, I wish that Ascend was around when we were going through the ranks, because it helps you to learn from experience. It helps you to basically learn from our mistakes and to develop and identify the right skill sets that are important to be successful in accounting firms or in corporations in general. So to me, what has helped us and hurt us is the model minority myth, in that, a lot of people view us to be successful, which to some degree is true, but also false. There is quite a bit of, because of that model minority myth, there's a lot of less funding, a lot less attention to a lot of the Asian Americans that do have issues. And so those communities are really hurting, and those need to be highlighted. But also, there's things that are perceived by others about Pan-Asians, and sometimes perception turns into reality. And so that hurts the Pan-Asians to move up to the levels of executives. And, basically I'm talking about stereotypes. Some which, I could understand, others which, are just not real. But more importantly, it's important that you be aware be self-aware, understand what critical successes are that are necessary to be successful in a firm. Because, as I was growing up through the firm, they had their own cultural way of doing things. And so a lot of it has to do with developing, and I call it soft skills. Some people call it essential skills. And, once again, this may be a little bit controversial, but I would say that you have to be choosing and identifying what it is that you want to adopt to, or, some people have used the word assimilate. Because in order for you to be successful, you have to have the right skill sets. And if you don't have them, you're not going to be successful. And so, let me give you an example that I'm talking about. One of the stereotypes is that, a lot of the Pan-Asians are very quiet and very respectful in terms of deferring to the leaders. Well, in that case, that was me. I just figured that if I went in, worked hard, my work would speak for itself, and it'll be recognized. I was very, very lucky to get a lot of people take me under their wings, my mentors, my sponsors, and tell me that's a lot of bull crap to speak. In that, if you want to get ahead, you got to make sure that you do a little bit of self-promotion, let people know who you are. You have to speak up. And so they made me speak up in order for me to be successful. And it was pretty awkward for me. I still remember one of the first times when the partner said, you're going to talk to the executives at this audit committee. And of course, I screwed it up a little bit. But, after a while, you get better and better at it.
Right.
Because reality is I am an introvert. But, coming to Ascend and helping to start Ascend, made me do what I have to do, which is to be a voice, to speak up. And, after a while, it just becomes very, very commonplace. So it is important that you understand what it is that are key critical success skills to be successful. And so the model minority myth sort of hurt us a little bit because, their perception, and if you take a look at some of the studies that we've put together, it's that, we're not leaders. We don't speak up. We're not charismatic. All these things, that's their perception. Not real. There are a lot of successful Pan-Asian leaders, but there's also certain things that you do need to develop to be successful.
One of the things that is challenging about stereotypes, there's a fantastic TED Talk, if anybody has ever heard it, and I will not say the woman's name because I can't pronounce it right, but the title is called The Danger of a Single Story. And what she talks about is stereotypes. And in particular, one of the quotes I found to be really true is that the problem with the stereotype isn't that it's not necessarily true, at least some elements of it, but it's not the whole story. And a lot of people look at the stereotype, assume it's the whole story, and then they don't look any further. And so you were just talking about a couple of stereotypes. And as a result of those stereotypes, people will see someone of a particular race or a gender and make assumptions. And then based on those assumptions, they make decisions. And that's where it gets dangerous. So what can someone do then? And specifically, I guess, for the Pan-Asian community, speaking to those who are watching, is there something specifically that they should be aware of and be thinking about that they can work on? Or for those who are not Pan-Asian and are listening, is there something that they can do to challenge those assumptions that they're making to sort of interrupt that bias?
Yes. So, yes, I want to address it from the population in general.
Okay.
And to me, I think the key thing is that if you want to be successful, you have to understand the culture of the organization. Each organization have their own culture. each one of them has, and sometimes what I refer to as, what it is that they're looking for to make you to partner or to make you into an executive or whatever. And then you have to understand that. And then you have to actually be self-aware about yourself and figure out, what it is what skill sets you need to learn. And to me, I think the best way to do that is to have what I refer to as a board of directors, a whole group of mentors focusing on all different aspects of things that you want to bounce things off, sounding board, not just work, but everything in general. And so you have a board of directors that will be honest with you. It has to be honest. You'll have your sponsors, your mentors in the organization that has to be honest with you and tell you, that this is what you need to work on. This is where, you got to start focusing on, because a lot of times things you don't focus on until it's too late. And so those people take you under their wings. If your board of directors tells you, what it is that you need improvement on or need to focus on, that will help you go a long way in understanding what it is to get you to the next level.
Right. So, Christopher, how about we go ahead and launch the next poll? I see some questions coming in about, did I miss one?
That poll is now launched. This is poll number 2. We'll leave this open for the next 60 seconds.
So I'm not giving this answer away because the polling question asks about familiarity of the term Pan-Asian. And it's interesting, Jeff, because you've been using Pan-Asian and then using Asian, and I get this question a lot. Are you allowed to say Black, or is it African American, or what is it? And I know the answer for the African American community is it depends on the person you're talking to, and it's really a question of what they are comfortable with, as opposed to you prescribing that on them. So I know that there's 2 different terms. Let's wait and see what folks are saying about familiarity with the term. But I wanted to plant that seed. So it looks like we only have a few seconds left and most people have voted.
And with that, we'll go ahead and close out poll number 2 in 3, 2, and 1. Let's share those results up on the screen now. It's like 70% said yes, 20% said no, and 10% were unsure. Back to you.
Thank you, Christopher. And so, those are promising results. Only 10% said not sure, and 70% said yes. And so you were going back and forth between Asian and Pan-Asian. And for those who said not sure or no, 30%, maybe you can explain the term. It's a pretty simple definition, I think.
Well, the Webster Dictionary terminology, Pan means all. So it's all Asians. And to me, we are Ascend Pan-Asian Leadership. So we include everyone who's from all parts of different Asian countries. And if you go back to the slide earlier, it'll show you the diaspora that we're talking about, as well as Pacific Islanders. So it's all the Asians that are in the workforce. And that's why when I say Pan-Asian, Asian, a lot of it is interchangeable. But, from a point of view, I just want to use the word Pan to make sure that it's all inclusive. And that's what we're really focused on. Yes. So because there are a lot of different ethnicities,
Yes,
even within the Asian communities. And so I want to make sure that we're all inclusive of all,
right.
and that everyone's the Pacific Islanders included.
It's interesting because a lot of times, and we're starting to see Latinx instead of Latino or Hispanic, because we know, just like you can't say African American, some of the pushback on that term is that Africa is a continent, not a country.
Right.
And so look at all the countries in Africa. And so I might be from, Liberia or the Congo or South Africa, but I'm not African per se. And when you talk about Pan-Asian, then I don't think a lot of people realize, unfortunately, because of stereotypes, maybe some people think Asian is only Japanese, Chinese, that there are certain countries they're familiar with and aren't
Yep.
necessarily familiar with other countries that are considered Asian. So I think that that's really, I would invite everybody listening to sort of give that a look, and become familiar, because that is a lot. There are quite a number of countries that fall under the umbrella of Asian. Um,
Right.
so I see some
Absolutely.
people saying they're not hearing the speaker now. So I want to make sure, are we coming through okay, Christopher?
Yes, you're coming through. I will respond. I think that's something on their end.
Okay. Now, the other question I had for you, Jeff, is I mean, speaking for you, does it matter then if somebody says Asian or Pan Asian, generally speaking?
To me personally, no. As I indicated, I always want to try and use the word Pan-Asian because I want to be inclusive,
Right.
and it's for all. But, I will not be offended if someone just says Asian to me, because even now there's so many different terms. I think everyone means the same. And so, like for instance, and I'll say this, that there's things out there that says there's Asian American Heritage Month, but then there's others that say Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And so everyone has all these different nomenclatures.
Right.
But I think the key thing is that we're meaning it's for all.
Right. Right. And that's really helpful, because I saw that. So there are a couple comments coming in, and I'll just read two of them. They're not really questions. Pew Research Center did a study. Only 3% of Latinos, by the way, Charles, thank you for sharing these. Only 3% of Latinos use the term, and I think he's referring to Latinx, and 76% have never heard of the term. And then the other comment is Latinx is a corporate American construct used to virtue signal. And so I think I would agree with some of that. I also think that corporate America in particular tries to stay safe and do the least offensive thing for the most people, and come up with words that are I don't want to say safe in a CYA way. I mean that are as broadly respectful as they can be, to your point about being inclusive. Now, I want to go back to the two slides before this. There's the slide that is about Stop Asian Hate. There's a question in here about what's the difference between AAPI and Pan Asian. So can you talk about that?
Asian American, AAPI stands for Asian American Pacific Islanders. And to me, when I talk about Pan-Asians, I'm talking about all Asians. And to me, that's a little bit interchangeable, even though Asian American Pacific Islanders is specific. And because, the Asian American Pacific Islanders is a terminology that was created for a slogan for what's happening here in the United States.
Right.
But when we talk about Pan-Asians, we're talking about something bigger. A lot of other Asian ethnicities that may or may not be impacted by the Asian hate. Although, from what I've seen and heard, it's pretty much impacting a lot of the Asian ethnicities. The only thing being some ethnicities more than others.
So there's actually the third polling question. This seems like the perfect time, Christopher, if you want to launch that.
That is now launched and on everyone's screen. We'll leave that open for 60 seconds.
And so the question is, are you familiar with Stop AAPI Hate? And the reason I put this slide up here, I think you just touched on it, Jeff, is that Stop Asian Hate is what's on the Ascend slide. Stop AAPI Hate is a hashtag that has been going around. And so let's see The responses are coming in, and I can see that over half so far say yes, they're familiar with it. Still 10% not sure. So it's going to be interesting to see these responses. In the meantime, I'm looking at the Q&A. Somebody said, not every Pan-Asian is an American citizen. And I apologize if that was something that we suggested was the case. That absolutely is not the case. Not everybody in America is an American citizen, to be fair. So thank you for that.
And that's why we use Pan-Asian, because a lot of our members are not American citizens. So Pan-Asian, to me, encompasses that, even if you're a U.S. citizen or not here in the U.S.
So I see the results, 55% said yes, 35% said no, and 10% said not sure. So thank you for that. So I'm looking at the time, and I want to make sure I'm going to throw some of these questions at you, and then maybe we can come back to the conversation, Jeff, or if something else comes up.
Whatever you want to do. I'm easygoing in terms of what we want to address. But yes, the reason why we use Stop Asian Hate is because, as we indicated, people will come up with their own nomenclature, hashtags and whatever. But I want to make sure that we stop all Asian hate, or all Pan-Asian hate, because to me, I think it's important that we all get together and just stop hate in general. But here we're focusing on the Asian hate primarily as a result of what's been happening here relating to all the attacks, whether it's physical, whether it's verbal, whether it's a microaggression. There's just been a lot that has been coming out as it relates to anti-Asian sentiment. And, just to give everyone a little bit of my feeling, I would say that the sentiment has always been there, going back to the days when I would say that even when my grandfather came and worked on the railroads, that a lot of the things has been there. But with the past administration, it sort of gave people a license to be more expressive about what they're feeling, and to, I guess, lose a little bit of their civility and their respectfulness. And so I think we need to, one, talk more about that and work against it, and help to educate the rest of the population about what's going on with racism as it applies to the Asians. Because the numbers that they're talking about, I would almost certainly say are tremendously underrepresented or unreported, and that a lot that's going on out there just needs to be stopped. It's just something that the country must focus on.
So there have been a couple questions and comments coming in. I think there's a concern that perhaps some of this might be, I'm going to say political in nature. And what I would say to those comments that are coming in is that we aren't going to necessarily, and I don't believe, Jeff, you're trying to specifically say that comments being made by some leaders is what caused this. I think that maybe a better way to express this is that there's no causation, but there's correlation. And that when some of the language and rhetoric changes, and then we see changes in society, we can't say one drives the other, but we can look for patterns. And so I would just encourage folks to just take it at that, and understand that there is an instance of significant rise in hate, and hate crimes and violence toward Pan-Asian Americans, and even if they're not Americans, people in this country. And that has risen significantly over the past year. So I would just try to stay away from being political and just say that that's what the data is telling us.
Okay, yeah, so I'm not trying to address it from a political point of view. I'm just addressing it from the right thing to do point of view, because it's not a matter of politics. It's a matter of, being respectful. It's a matter of being civil. It's a matter of understanding that everybody here in the U.S. Should be respected, and that there is no place for hate,
Right.
and that has nothing to do with politics.
Thank you. No, I would agree. Respect is the key, and everybody deserves to be treated with dignity. So,
Yes.
all right. So back to some of these questions. Let me go back to the top. There was a question that came in, and so I'm going to synthesize it down to: would it help achieve inclusion if we started doing some education all the way down at the elementary school level? And then they said in elements of finance, etc., and that they have role models to aspire to. I know the answer, but I thought you want to answer that question.
Well, of course, the answer is going to be, and that's one of our major points, is that there needs to be an education, an awareness, and of course, the sooner the better. What it is that's going to be discussed. It is important that it shows that we express whatever is necessary, so that everyone does understand the importance of knowing and working with people who are different than you.
Right.
And working from a point of, like you said, treating people with dignity and civility and respectfulness.
Right.
So yes, by all means, and we at Ascend are working on education with our corporate partners, as well as discussions like these, so that way people hear, know, and then can go and do more of their own learning, so that they can focus on, the things that we talked about.
Right. And the SEN does offer conferences for college students, and those college events are, raise awareness for the kids that are pursuing college, not necessarily in college.
Ascend is a life cycle organization, so we start from college all the way up to executives and all the way up to the board level. So we have all programs, we have alliances with all organizations at different levels. And so we do work with people along the way to be, whether it's their mentors, to help educate them, to help bring awareness, to help develop the right skill sets, to be the role models, to be the voice, all the things that we can do to help somebody through their career journey.
So I'm going to read this question word for word because I don't want to change the language around. Isn't the onus on employers to change and understand Asians and not assume Asians are automatically smart and hold them to higher expectations? And how can Asian employees assert themselves and not upset employers who think of Asians as, and they put in air quotes, meek?
What was the quote? You faded out on me on that.
The last word meek was in quotation marks. So how can Asian employees assert themselves and not upset employers who think of them as meek?
Okay, excellent question. I want to thank the person who asked it. So my viewpoint and Ascend's viewpoint is that it's always going to be a two-way street, and that there are things that Pan-Asians can do to develop the right skills and to develop the right approach on how to handle certain areas, including being quiet or being viewed as meek. But also on the flip side, though, there has to be, the employer has to understand whether they are viewing things through a different lens, using their unconscious bias to look at, once they see somebody and say, oh, automatically, oh, that's a meek person. So we have to focus on that, as well as the organization needs to have structural change or things in place that will help people to look through those and to take into account, I would say, these fallacies or these point of views, so that way it does not impact the person's progression. So, you know, to me, it's going to be the employers acting in a different way, doing different things, understanding different things. It's going to be the employee that will have to say, okay, let me dispel the stereotype. Let me do things in my way. And that, to me, I think, I don't want to say it's assimilation, but I want to say it's more adopting the skill set. And I'll use another one as an example. You know, a lot of times people will say, you know, that I am pretty quiet. Not me, but them, they're very quiet. So I would turn that around and say, okay, but you know what you have to do? You have to use your listening skills as your superpower. But then at the same time, make sure that using those listening skills, that you do say whatever is important so that people understand that you are a contributor, that you're not meek, and that you are able to say and share your point of view, so that way people know who you are, as opposed to just sitting there and not participating.
So we have, I think, 3 minutes, and we have one more question. So I'll throw the question out there, and I don't know if you want to end with some closing remarks here. But the question is, do you believe the term BIPOC is offensive to Pan-Asians? And just for those listening, BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, People of Color. Do you think that's offensive to Pan-Asians?
No, I've just recently seen that come across my desk, that terminology. As a matter of fact, I didn't even know what it was until I had to look it up what it was. So we are people of color. You know what? People use whatever tone that they want to use in terms of our skin color. So it is descriptive.
Any final thoughts before I close us out? Jeff, I don't know if you heard that. Did you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, you know, I want, once again, I want to thank you for having me have this conversation with you. I think it is a very, very important conversation. And I think it's also very important that, you know, we do speak about this. You know, sometimes race is a hard thing to talk about.
Yeah.
You know, you have to have honest conversations. You have to understand both sides. And the more we understand, the more we know how to work together. And so, you know, any chance that I get to be that voice, I greatly appreciate it. And, you know, hopefully for those that want to learn more or want to get more involved, you know, you can look us up on the Ascend website. And if you have any other questions or whatever, feel free, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. I guess you have to just get them through Jina, or you could just find it and just send it to Ascend.
Now, so before I give away that last tidbit, Christopher, we have our fourth polling question that I know we got to get in.
And that is now launched and on their screen right now. We'll leave this open for the next 60 seconds.
So the question is, does your organization have programs or groups like employee resource groups to support Pan-Asian professionals? And so on the slide, if you download the slide, on the bio page for Jeff at the very bottom is his contact information. And so you can click right on the PDF. Sorry, Jeff, but they can click and email you directly, as well as a link to the Ascend website. There's a direct hyperlink there. So I would encourage folks to, if you have questions, follow up, as well as my contact information is available. So feel free to email me as well if there's a question we didn't get to. So let's see. I can't tell how this clock works and whether we're up to the end of the open poll or.
We are just about to close that now in 3, 2, and 1. We've now closed poll number 4. And pass it back to you to close things up.
There you go. So, listen, thank you. I'm so glad you were able to join us, Jeff. And for everyone else, I would encourage you. I'm hosting these conversations every other Friday at 3 o'clock, the D&I one-on-one series. And what I'm doing is inviting people to come in and share their thoughts on the topic so that we can all learn a little bit more. So, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, these kinds of conversations could go on all day. So,
Yes.
but unfortunately, we only have an hour. And with that, Christopher, I will hand it back to you to wrap this up for us.
All right, and with that, we will go ahead and wrap up today's webinar. We here at CPA Academy will process that credit later today, and it'll be available in your CPA Academy accounts within 24 hours. Everyone will also have the opportunity for a full webinar evaluation. Those links will be available in your email as well as your CPA Academy account page. And while you're there, take a look at the other webinars and resources we're able to offer. And I did want to say thanks again. This was a fantastic presentation, Jina, Jeff. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. I know I got a lot to take away from this, and our audience is very engaged with a lot of questions for you as well that we will be sending your way. We are so appreciative of your time, and a warm thank you to all of you in the audience for joining us today as well. We hope to see you all on future webinars. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.